Hello, and welcome to my first game asset tutorial. In this tutorial, we will learn how to use the free Bitmap font template found in the Visionaire shop. We'll also make improvements to this template and learn how to make adjustments for various font styles that may give Visionaire problems. Okay, so let's get started. First thing we have to do is download the template. So let's go to the Visionaire website, and if we choose Shop, then Resources, we'll see that there is a font template file under the Resources section. If we click on that, we'll go to its main page, which contains a web link down at the bottom on where to download it. So if you just right-click on that and download that file, then you can open it up into Photoshop or whatever Photoshop compatible bitmap editor you have available to you. Now there's one other thing on this page that's important, and that's the character set that's here. If you are loading this into Visionaire, this is going to be important. In this tutorial we aren't going to load the font into Visionaire yet, but that will be handled in a future tutorial. Now I already have this font loaded into Photoshop, so if we go over to Photoshop, I have it here. Now this template is composed of two parts. This main part here, which contains all the letters of the alphabet, plus symbols and numbers and some international characters in this case. This part here is the actual characters of the font. The second part is this part here, which are these underscores that are on the side. Those underscores are guidelines to show the baseline of where the text sits. So each line of text has its own guideline. Now in this template, it uses the standard underscore character to determine that, and that's an easy, great way to do it. However, there are issues with that with different types of fonts, because Visionaire requires that this is a straight, thick line, and if the font has the line so that it's more of a squiggle or something like that, it doesn't turn out so good. Let me just show you. I'm going to change the font to a different type of font. In this case, I'm going to change it to Benographic Regular. And if you look, now that guideline is no longer straight. It's a little messed up. And Visionaire may have trouble with determining that that is the baseline and exactly what part of it is the baseline. Although this is not exactly a great font to use for Visionaire. As you can see, it's kind of icky at this size and hard to read. So it's unlikely that it's a great font to use, but this is an extreme example to show you that that's maybe not the best way to determine the baseline for Visionaire. So let me show you how we can do that. I'm going to step it back, turn it back to Arial, and then I'm going to show you how I do the baseline. Now, keeping the underscore there, we could actually delete the underscore and replace it with something, but then we have to determine where the baseline is for each line. However, the underscore does give us a nice guideline as to where the baseline is. So what we want to do is have the best of both worlds. We want the underscore, but we don't want the underscore. So let me first of all show you how to replace the underscore, and that's just simply with the line tool. And I'm going to take the line tool, I'm going to leave the weight at about 3 pixels high and no stroke, or basically no outline on it. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to draw a straight line and leave it right there. As you can see, it can just sit right over the top. I'm just going to use the arrow key to nudge it down a bit, and there we go. It sits right over the top of the underscore, and that's in the exact same spot the underscore is, so that should give us our baseline. Now I'm going to duplicate that quickly here and just drop it to the next one. I'm using Shift and the down arrow to make it leap several pixels at a time. If it doesn't perfectly match up, then just use the straight arrow keys up and down. It'll just nudge it by a pixel. Okay, so then I'm going to duplicate both of these, place those, then duplicate all four, and that should finish it off. Okay, so that gives me my underscores for the baselines. Now I want to remove the underscores from the text, but I don't want to remove them completely. So the way you can do that is to draw a marquee selection around your text, and then select your text layer and use the mask option to mask it out. Now you're left with the underlines, which are perfectly square straight lines indicating the baseline because they were sitting on top of the underscores, and the font is perfectly fine the way it is. And that should give you a completely problem-free template. And if we want to see the underscores again, all we have to do is disable the layer mask. And there we can see them again. And if we want to remove them, we just enable the layer mask. Alright, now what happens if we want to change the font? Arial is a very nice, straight font. It's very blocky, it'll display wonderfully on the screen, but it has very little interest. And sometimes we want to have another font that's more in keeping with our theme. So if we're doing a fantasy type theme, medieval fantasy, maybe we would lean a little bit more to a font that has more of a older feel to it, more medieval feel. When you choose a new font, you have to be careful because some fonts can be very problematic. This template is set for a font that's like Arial and the size that it's at, but let's see how we can adjust it if we increase the size and change the font entirely. Okay, so I know of a font that's incredibly problematic, and its name is Sir William Hyperbold. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to delete the layer mask that we created, because when we change the font, the layer mask is probably not going to be of any use anymore. We'll have to remask it after we make adjustments. So let's just delete the layer mask. It'll bring back the underscores, which are good because when we change the font size, the baseline's going to change on us anyway, so the current position of everything will need to be adjusted for those lines that we created. So let's change our font. Now I'm going to go Control or Command A and to highlight all the text within our paragraph object, our paragraph of text, and I'm going to change this to Sir William Hyperbold. Sir William Hyperbold. Now, as you can see, this font is probably going to be difficult for Visionaire to read. In some cases, the top character from one line is nearly overlapping the character below. That's not going to be very good for Visionaire to try and figure out. There's other cases that there's characters missing. And then down here we can see that there seems to be a bit of an oddity with the font here that these characters all have an underscore that run one right into the other, and it doesn't look good. So we'll just talk about how to adjust this. Also, if we want to change the font size as well to increase the detail, I'm going to change this, because it's a little bit difficult to read, from 26 to maybe even 36 in size, so that we regain some of the details. As you can see that the details are coming back a little bit, where there should be a slight gap with the letters so that you can read them a little bit better. Now what's going on is that the font is no longer wrapping properly. It's added in a hyphenation for wrapping the font, and the base lines are totally messed up and half our font is missing. To fix that, we need to increase our image size. So let's go to the canvas size and adjust that. I'm going to adjust this to both 1024 and 1024. And then I want my relative anchor to be the top, so that everything's anchored to the upper left-hand corner of the bitmap, so that when the bitmap resizes, it will be expanding to the right and down. And we'll choose OK. Now I'm going to adjust my view size back to 100% so that I can see everything. Now if I go back to my text tool, I can select it, and you notice that the paragraph border for the text is still the same size that it was. So I'm just going to expand that out to actually the full size, and then I'm going to expand this down so that I make sure I have all my text. Now you could easily resize this canvas back down, probably something along the lines of 400 or something like that would easily encompass the whole font, but we're going to expand this out a little bit more to try and fix this overlapping. Now I'm going to increase this all the way down to maybe about 800, let's say. And to change the font lines so that the line spacing is better, because we can see we've got overlapping here, and Visionaire, when it tries to read it, it's gonna get confused as to what's a character, what isn't. So if I go to the character and paragraphs panel, it has a setting here that's called the set the leading value, and it's set in point values. What we want to do is we want to increase that. You can see that the highlighted areas are now expanding. We can see that gives enough space now between these different lines of text that Visionaire should now be able to see that. However, we have to line up our baselines again, because you can see that our lines are now out of alignment with the underscores. So let's adjust those. And I'll just quickly go through and do that. So just use the arrow keys to put these back into place. All right, so now that that's done, we can actually remask our font. Select the font layer and choose mask. Now our lines are there and they should work fine as a baseline, because they lined up with the underscores and there's enough distance between each of the lines of text. Now, for the fact that our font is missing characters, we'll have to draw those in. For instance, I believe it's the A and the O that's missing here for the international characters. those can be put in, and we'll need to put them in so that we have all of the characters that are needed to match up with the character set. So what we can do is we can actually delete the one that's there and put in the normal A, for instance, because that's the A that's missing. What we can do is do that and then draw in this little bit here, the little 2 dots. Those would be able to be put over top of the character and make it the international character. That's a quick, easy fix for that. However, down here, this is going to be problematic because this is actually part of the font and we want to remove it. Now that we could mask it out as we did the underscores, what we would have to do is re-enable, add the mask to selection that we already have, and then we want to use the Alt key to highlight that, for instance, and perhaps this over to here, and this over to there, let's say. It's not perfect, but if you zoom in, you can get more finite details in there. And then if I hit the mask tool or actually we want to delete that. We want to delete the existing mask. What we want to do is then mask that. That removes that and it fixes those. Of course, you can brush it up a little bit and make it a little bit more accurate. But that's how I would fix these things. It keeps the font still a font, but it allows you to get all the letters in there that you need. Okay, so there are some problematic fonts out there that you're going to have trouble with. Even still, these types of fonts, I don't recommend them for things like Visionaire because they don't display well at small resolution. It's hard to read them. Fonts that are closer to in appearance to Arial are much better fonts to have. Now, some other issues that we will have with Visionaire. Let me just revert everything we've done here, unfortunately. I'm going to revert it back to its original. And some of the issues, just to quickly get back to the Arial one, you'll notice that these fonts, each of these characters, all are pretty well, each letter is one flowing piece, pretty much. There are some problematic characters sometimes with Visionaire, depending on the font. For instance, Visionaire, when it reads in a character, it reads it from left to right to determine if it's one solid character or not. Now, for characters such as an equal sign, where there is a gap between the two bars, that's not a problem because it's being read left or right. It's still considered one solid character. However, a character like a double quote, where each quote piece could have potentially a gap between them, that could be read as two characters rather than one. In this case, we're saved by the fact that we placed an outline around the character and that filled in the gap for us. In other cases, your font that you choose may have an issue with characters such as this, or perhaps the design of the font is such that even the letters themselves have broken pieces left to right, particularly things like maybe there's a gap that's breaking off the curved part of the D from the straight line part of the D or the B, or any such thing like that. There may be certain fonts that exist like that, like stencil type fonts, or maybe some techno looking fonts that may be very interesting, may display great. However, there does exist that problem that one piece is broken off from the rest of the character, and you may be able to get around it by putting an outline around the character so that it looks like it's all one piece and fills in that gap. However, if that's not the case, look for those types of areas that are problems and try to fill them in with either an outline manually yourself. You'll have to make those adjustments and determine for yourself how you want to make those changes in order to make the font still look good and keep its general appearance. It will take some playing around. You can sometimes mask things out that are problems, as we learned, or you'll have to add portions in just with the paintbrush or the pencil tool or pen tool in order to just fill in little bits just to connect one side to another so that Visionaire doesn't get confused. Okay, so that's everything that I know about using this template right now. If any of you have some suggestions or advice, please add them to the comments below. And that's the end of this tutorial.